Hi, folks. It is lovely to see you again. I'm Tarah Wheeler, CEO of Red Queen Dynamics. Thank you so much for joining us again for Red Queen Dynamics and Dinah's Cybersecurity Office Hours. I am absolutely thrilled this week to bring you Adam Shostack of Shostack and Associates. He invented a little something we're going to talk about this week called threat modeling, and I'd love to tell you a little bit more about how on earth he ended up on this broadcast with me. But first, his bio. Adam is the author of Threat Modeling, Designing for Security, and Threats, What Every Engineer Should Learn from Star Wars. If you haven't already done so, take a look at this book and look very carefully at the cover. I promise you there's an Easter egg there that is just, it's beautiful. He's a leading expert on threat modeling, a consultant, expert witness, and game designer. He has decades of experience delivering security, I'll say. His experience ranges across the business world, from founding startups to nearly a decade at Microsoft. His accomplishments include that he helped create the CVE. He's now an emeritus member of the advisory board. He fixed auto-run for hundreds of millions of systems. Thank you, St. Adam. Led the design and delivery of the Microsoft SDL threat modeling tool V3. Created what is a very fun game, the Elevation of Privilege threat modeling game, and he co-authored the New School of Information Security. Beyond consulting and training, Shostack serves as a member of the Black Hat Review Board, an advisor to a variety of companies and academic institutions, and he is an affiliate professor at the Paul G. Allen School of Computer Science and Engineering at the University of Washington. I'm tired. We're done now. I'm gonna go take a nap.
But you read it so nicely. You read it like you were interested, and so many people just monotone.
Monotone. It's fun, and at the same time, it's also I've had people read my bio in a monotone before too, and it's always just it's a little exhausting. And at the same time, your accomplishments and credentials really overlie just the fact that you really care about information security, about the people that are behind it. I think about game design combined with information security, and people who think in terms of game design are they're fascinating creatures to me. I am not a game designer, I'm a game theorist, which is a funny story. That's actually how I talked my way into my first role at Microsoft, too. They kind of, I ended up talking my way into it because the hiring manager there didn't get the difference between game design and game theory. So that's how I ended up having to learn HTML in 24 hours and start doing websites at Microsoft Game Studios. But no, it's good to see that you've got this focus. And before I ask you to dive into a little bit about what threat modeling is, what it means, why it exists the way that it does, um, it's such a basic concept at this point that we all kind of take it for granted. I guess the question I have for you is why do you care about information security, especially given that seems like you're on the cutting edge of so much infosec. I've seen some of the stuff that you do, and yet we're in a world here with managed service providers and small businesses where we're all going to have the same problems for the next 10 years, honestly, and they're going to be ransomware and cyber insurance and business email compromise and invoice fraud. Like, why are you here and why do you care?
Um, let's start with the easy ones. I I think that there are some really exciting challenges. I think that the question of how do we build systems that operate in the presence of adversaries and are resilient to the things that we encounter is so important, because the internet lets us do, I mean, let's be frank, the internet lets us do this, right? We're here talking to a whole bunch of people around the world, and this frankly is magical and new in our lifetimes. And it creates opportunities for us as business people, and it creates opportunities for people that want to interfere with what we're doing, take advantage of it. And I think if we're going to get the benefits, we need to be cognizant of the dangers and So when I think about what I really do, it's how do we, and this goes back to the New School book, which is all about how do we get more transparent about why we're doing what we're doing. And it talks about being more transparent about breaches. Um, and I think about what we're hearing from the SEC today. You know, as we were preparing, we talked about some of the new FTC rules that are coming out. To me, the questions of how do we get smarter? How do we not be in a place where we're still dealing with the same things 10 years out?
Mhm.
That would be great, wouldn't it?
It's frustrating to think about it, and it has to do, I think, so much with the fact that the assets and resources that are available, it really goes back to Wendy Nazar's concept of the security poverty line on so many different levels. This idea that we've dedicated time and energy on the cutting edge, and there's sort of a vague trailing floor of compliance requirements which themselves don't keep up with actual threats that cause such a mixture of confusion in the middle, which is where most people are, right? That's why this is, I think, so frustrating for people. I remember talking with you about this, and one of the things that has really confused and frustrated a lot of people is the kind of regulation that's coming along, which doesn't acknowledge the fact that there's no resources to make these mandates work. There was a great Fortune article that just came out, and I know you and I both had taken a look at this, and it describes the fact that the United States government is starting to really come to grips with and mandate compliance requirements across multiple segments of the economy in a way that is it's forward thinking, it's important, and at the same time, I genuinely can't imagine that many people that are prepared and ready to go for this year, the new CMMC requirements for any business that it finds itself anywhere in the supply chain for DoD or for the federal government. So I guess the question I'd have as we start kicking into sort of why threat modeling is, do MSPs, let me ask you a more provocative question. Do MSPs, do managed service providers need to take the federal government into account in doing their own threat modeling this year?
Um, uh, I so when let me, if I may, step back and make sure we're all on the same page about what threat modeling is,
I knew you were going to do that.
and, and then answer your question, because your quest. So when I talk about threat modeling,
Mhm.
I think about four very, very simple questions. What are we working on? What can go wrong? What are we going to do about it? And did we do a good job? And if you're asking those questions, you're threat modeling. And I want to be really, really explicit about this because I wrote a book which is a little bit on the thick side about threat modeling. And so people often believe that threat modeling is heavyweight. If you're asking the questions of what are we working on and what can go wrong, you're doing a great job already. And so if I ask the question, what can go wrong? And the answer is my business isn't ready for a requirement that is a checkbox on the form that says take millions of dollars from DoD. That's wrong. And what I'm going to do about it is find a way to check that box so I can take Uncle Sam's money. I have not to be crude about it, but the business of business is business, as someone once said. And so, yes, at one level, you need to think about forthcoming regulations as you threat model. Now, there's another way that I can read your question, and this is why I got my face scrunched up a little bit, which is Uncle Sam a threat actor which businesses should take into account? Um, and this is more complicated, right? Um, I'm going to guess that not every MSP is in the US. I'm going to guess that not every US based MSP has all of its customers in the United States. I'm going to guess that even though American MSPs are not generally serving companies that they know to be on sanctions lists, could the US government be attacking one of your customers? Potentially, sure. Why not? Should you
It's
worry
possible.
should you worry specifically about that? Mm, Fighting the NSA is pretty hard. They're pretty good at what they do. And as you were saying,
Yeah.
we've got ransomware gangs, we've got BC, we uh, we don't need the NSA is not going to bring out the A team to deal with companies that are below the security poverty line. They'll let the interns do it. And if the interns can do it, that the thing, and let me loop back because I've gone a little deep into the weeds for a reason, which is talking about threat modeling. We often want to talk about the cool, clever adversaries like the NSA. But we don't need to care about who's behind the phishing email. We need to worry that, hey, phishing emails continue to work. Maybe you should think about MFA. Maybe you should think about being more cloud oriented so that your desktops are a little harder to compromise. There's lots of strategies to answer the question, what are we going to do about it? And I think that if we get into the fun questions about NSA this or APT 27 that, we distract ourselves from those poverty line sorts of questions that Wendy gave
Mhm.
us.
I think we do too, and it's going straight to that comment. One of our favorite humans, James Byerly, had just reposted something on LinkedIn. I was going to point out here, and Tom Lawrence says this on LinkedIn. It's a great conversation. I mean, hundreds of thousands of small businesses and MSPs are going to get hacked this year. Really, the hard to swallow pill is, your business might get hacked, but you're just not big enough to make the news. And so that's the frustrating part of this, is that not only are businesses under resourced, but when they're targeted, the the level of attention we pay to small businesses is not commensurate with the sum total of the damage done to all small businesses in the United States. Is it a tragedy of the commons problem? Is it how would we define that, and what's a good solution for it? Just solve all of small business cybersecurity for me if you could. I've got another 28 minutes. Go.
So the frame I
Yeah.
like to use to think about this problem is public health. Um, when you talk about the sum total of the damage that's done, that sounds like we're not worried about the health of an individual person or business. We're worried about the lifespan of the average person. We're worried about how many people are sick right now. And I think that in cybersecurity, we've gotten really focused on military metaphors. We've gotten really focused on criminality as a metaphor. Um, but we don't have dashboards that show us what's going on overall. And this is maybe something that MSPs can help us with, is insight into the state of their customers. Maybe this is something that Red Queen can help us with, is insight into the state of people more broadly. And we do have some of this, right? We have data from folks like Verizon and their DBIR. But in contrast to actual public health, where we have the CDC and the WHO and the Council of State and Territorial Epidemiologists, who define diseases so that the reporting that happens mandatorily to the CDC is in an organized fashion, and that there's compatibility between these reports. Ooh, crazy thought, compatibility.
Mhm.
So we can compare between organizations. We lack a lot of that infrastructure.
I've talked to you about this a bit before. There's a problem. I don't want to dig too deeply into words like taxonomy, but one of the challenges we really do have is how do we compare the relative harm done to an individual small business with that done across all small businesses? Now, you're not wrong. Obviously, we have the ability, outside Red Queen Dynamics to provide an MSP with a view across all of their clients. But what we are seeing as a whole across all MSPs is that there is differentiation between market segments, business sizes, industry levels, sophistication of attacks that are targeted at individual levels. And as we continue to grow, our data just becomes bigger and bigger and more fascinating about how the small business and MSP sector are individually specifically targeted, and how there's a very careful way that it's almost being treated as shrinkage by the US economy in a really profound way. And I am offended at the idea that the valued small businesses and managed service providers are being treated like something that walked off the shelves at a Target. And that offends me. It deeply offends me. And so I'm looking forward to being able to provide some data that cross cuts in a meaningful way that lets us analyze that. I don't see a lot of political will to provide the initial assistance to get those numbers in place, and that's challenging. You and I've talked about things like the Bureau of Cyber Statistics and a bunch of other opportunities like that. But I'm looking now and at what's a good one? Oh, we had looked at this yesterday, I think, Adam, too, which is there's some major compliance deadlines that are coming up in 2024. And one of those first deadlines coming up is a PCI compliance deadline for PCI version 4. Now, for those of you that haven't dug deeply into the thrilling world of compliance, PCI compliance isn't actually something you do with security people, except at one remove. It's something you do with an accountant. So PCI compliance has to do with an audit that is run by an accounting firm that often uses a third party cybersecurity firm to do basically a pen test and a security evaluation as a portion of that evaluation. But I mean, is there any reason to expect that a bunch of small businesses or managed service providers that are expected to keep them in compliance are going to fall out of compliance with PCI version 4 that weren't with version 3?
So let me flip that around
Okay.
and ask, if nobody is falling out of compliance, why are they bothering to change the rules?
Right.
Right. And so the I don't need to know. I mean, I hope that the whole of the PCI world is not being made to do all of this work to think about what's going on for nothing.
Hmm.
Um, there's a lot of people. I went through this with Shostack and Associates the other day. I got an email from our CRM tool, HubSpot. They were talking about changes at Google and Yahoo on email deliverability. And the tooling, I don't want to be mean to anyone, but Google's Postmaster tools stink for small businesses.
Yeah.
I'm logged in trying to figure out, am I okay or not?
Hmm.
And there's like 9 screens, and most of them say, sorry, we don't have enough data. If you don't have enough data, are you going to deliver my email because I've got my SPF and my DKIM and my DMARC all good? Or are you going to reject it? Because as a small business person, right, setting aside all of the theory and how do we make the world a better place, I also spend energy delivering training to customers. And I would just like to know the answer with regards to how am I doing here? How am I doing with PCI 4? And actually, I do know the answer for PCI 4. I've outsourced that to Stripe. I'm okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I
Um,
love that.
and there's various complicated reasons that we don't need to get into why we do our own email rather than outsourcing it to somebody else. But I'd love a tool that just tells me, am I green, yellow, or red? What's going to change? And the same thing with PCI is we want as business owners, we want to focus on the things that we uniquely do well to deliver value to our customers.
Right.
Um,
That's it's huge. As a small business, we both had this conversation. We're small business owners, right? And the emotional and logistical load on a small business owner, who is in ultimately the buck stops here, is huge. And bottom lining things matters a lot. This is a great comment from one of the LinkedIn users. Often we don't see the name of sometimes LinkedIn users because they've got their own controls locked down too so tight. So we salute you, LinkedIn user, for locking that shit down. But it's a great point to say that maybe there is an element of needing to make sure that there are some people that are falling out of compliance. Mostly because if you're not catching people who are doing a poor job on security with your baseline rules and letting them fall below that, what's even the point of any of compliance, right? So I think that's the real challenge that we're looking at. So
I
yeah.
think I think that the thing that we really need is traceability and relevance in the rules. For example, a lot of the rules that are out there require you to change passwords every 90 days.
Mhm.
And this is actively regressive. It drives up our help desk costs, it locks people out of their accounts, and it it's interesting because as I say this, we've seen 23andMe in the
Mhm.
news, and 23andMe is asserting and blaming their customers that their customers were bad for reusing passwords across accounts.
Mhm.
But hey, if I've got to change my password every 90 days, you
Right.
bleeping right I'm gonna reuse passwords. Let's
Mhm.
be honest that some of the standards that we've got
Right.
are driving security downwards while costing us a lot of money. And the reason that I'm so interested in things like public health, root cause analysis, the Cyber Safety Review Board, breach
Mhm.
reporting, all of these for me are data sources that ought to inform us about what goes wrong,
Mhm.
so that we can do a better job and ideally inform us, hey, these controls aren't working.
We found that so with Dyna, the what we build to help small businesses stay in compliance and help MSPs watch their small business clients stay in compliance. One of the things I've told MSPs is, we bring them aboard and sell to MSPs is, I know you're faced with competing requirements all the time, and one of those competing requirements is often found in cyber insurance questionnaires, often which are often behind the times on standards. So we actually filled out a cyber insurance questionnaire that demanded that we change our passwords every 30 days and wanted to know if we did that. And I said no, because this is a stupid rule. So also proving that the form was lacking form validation, because it really should have been a checkbox. So I filled it out that way, and they granted us cyber insurance. Uh, but it's meaningful that we have to have a question for certain of the frameworks that we provide, including some of the cyber insurance questionnaires we provide, which ask and demand to be in compliance with that questionnaire that you change your passwords on a given schedule. And it's so ironic that we have to add a compensating control for the fact that everybody already does it better with a password manager. So add a compensating control because you do it better than the framework is not something I had on my 2023 bingo card, right? And yet it's right there. So I think it's profound, and I love this question also from, of course, Deviant, and the password change rules, that I would call them part of the long tail of industry that has glommed onto older standards that hasn't updated them yet. And I'm actually curious about this one. You know as much or more as I do about compliance on this level, Adam. Are they codified in law, or are they industry driven? We get these bad rules that don't match up to, for instance, NIST, which changed like half a decade ago.
Ye- So I don't think any law requires them, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if regulation with the force of law required them. So, for example, the New York Department of Financial Services rules, or CMDC. I'm pretty sure that both HIPAA and PCI require password changes on a regular basis.
Mm-hmm.
Frankly, I think both of those ought to be requiring multi-factor authentication. And one of our LinkedIn users is commenting that the person who wrote the password change laws has publicly recanted. Yeah, and good on him, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
I forget the gent's name, but good on him for being willing to say, "Hey, I made a mistake. I tried to do the right thing. I did the wrong thing."
Mm-hmm. Learning and admitting that we're learning in this field is not the same thing as failing. It's the same thing as being a good member of this community, and that's one of the hard parts about it. I love that that exists the way that it does. I'm sitting here thinking about the fact, I love Ian's note right here that SOX is also called the Full Employment of Auditors Act. A lot of people are saying now, for those of you who have not had a chance to take a look at it, there's new SEC breach disclosure rules, and that's going to be coming into play on June 15th. We've covered the FTC rule change from October 27th, the one for non-banking financial institutions, kind of ad nauseum at this point. But the new SEC regulations for breach disclosure for small businesses that drops all the way down to what businesses that with no limit on size, its limit on annual revenue, I believe. And that, I mean, there's a lot of people that think that that is going to be the next SOX, that this is going to kick in a full new compliance regime. What do you think this is going to do?
I think it's going to make a lot of lawyers very wealthy.
Fair.
And I the thing that I would like it to do is I would like it to require businesses to talk about what went wrong in detail.
Mm-hmm.
This information is sometimes called a roadmap for attackers, and it's sometimes called a roadmap for the lawsuit. And um, actually, in the latest CISA Secure by Design guidance, there's a great quote which says, "Attackers seem to be doing just fine without roadmaps. Stop worrying about giving them the roadmap." It's not a precise quote, but the attackers are doing fine without roadmaps is. And I think it's important to recognize that. And I think it's also important to recognize that breaches sometimes lead to lawsuits. About one breach in six results in a lawsuit, most of which are dismissed at the discovery phase. And most of the time, when there is a lawsuit, the lawsuit is really not about the crime, it's about the cover up.
Mm-hmm.
People understand in 2023, 2024,
Oh.
um, that people make mistakes, that there are security problems which happen, and it's not what happens when the company is victimized that leads people to get angry generally.
Mhm.
It's once you've had the problem, you decide to prioritize your own interests over that of your users, over that of your customers. You, and I'm going to point a finger here because they did it first.
Mhm.
23andMe blaming their customers for the breach
Yeah.
um, doesn't seem like a healthy way to engage with what just happened and say, as you said earlier in this conversation, I made a mistake. We're going to get better. They're like, oh gosh, you people should have done differently, and we would have been able to protect you if only you had.
Mhm.
Rather than detecting that their website was spidered or that these passwords were getting stuffed at high speed. And I'm not going to, I don't know
Mhm.
enough of the details with 23andMe to say what they could have done, what they should have done, where they were with respect to these various standards, but I don't
Mhm.
think they were below the security poverty line.
Mm-mm.
Um, and so I think what I would like to see, to return to your question, what I would like to see out of these SEC rules is transparency so that investors can make decisions about the competence of management and if they want to be investing in that company or not. And that's the goal of the SEC rules. And if we don't get specifics about what went wrong, um, if we don't get specifics about what went wrong and why those things were happening, how can I, as an investor, judge if management is doing their job? Right? We
I
hear a
think yeah.
lot about companies that, sorry,
No, no, please,
we hear a
please.
lot about companies that are 5 years behind on patching.
Mhm.
Um, if you're 5 years behind on patching, I'm sorry, but as a manager, I'm judging you,
Yeah.
right? You're making choices about how you're running your business. Maybe those are good choices, but maybe your IT systems are not in shape, and I can incorporate that into my decision making.
Right. I've told
Ooh, we've
quite a
got a
few people.
great comment here.
Oh, totally.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I'm gonna pop onto this in just one second. I anecdotally, with anecdata, um, mostly because this is not the kind of information that companies want to let out. It's been my experience that most Fortune 500 companies are between 18 months and 3 years behind on an average of all patching. And there are companies that are certainly worse than that, some that are better. But at this point, I think we're seeing, even over the course of the last few years, it's not getting better because we continue to have legacy systems that support business critical functions. And the fear of losing a business critical function is greater than that of a potential security breach. The guarantee of loss of revenue is always going to win over something scary that might happen one day. That's the real challenge. And yet, how do we know that's going to happen? This is a great comment. I love this. Users have to make the right security decisions and they don't even know they're doing it. It's great. It's perfect. I mean, the thing you just mentioned that drives me crazy, Adam, was the stuffing attack, right? Credential stuffing on a modern website with a company that is below, that is definitely above the security poverty line. I don't honestly find that to be acceptable. I really don't. Credential stuffing is literally hacking 101. That's where we start out, the babies in hacking, right? You start out with, here's a password list and how to plug it into a website. This is bush league shit, right? Why would we accept that in a large company?
You
And
maintain a list of
yeah,
common passwords on GitHub.
yeah, it's ridiculous. So I love this comment, and users are not to
Yeah.
blame for something that affects more than them is a wonderful way to put it. I love that. No single user is responsible individually if a breach impacts more than them. It means there's a flaw someplace, and that flaw could have been something that was accepted or transferred or mitigated in terms of risk, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist, right? Optimistic.
Yes, and one thing I do want to say about LinkedIn here,
Yeah.
or not about LinkedIn, about 23andMe, is
Oh,
we
we're
don't
going back into
actually
the vault
know
for that
what
reference.
happened.
Yeah.
Um, we don't know what happened. No, it wasn't intentional. That was but oftentimes the public reporting on breaches is inaccurate, and so I want to. If something else happened to 23andMe, let's not make the assumption that the public reports are right. And this drives the importance of the CEO signing a piece of paper that says, here's what happened. The form 8K above is accurate.
Mhm. There's a question also that has come up several times about the materiality of issues. And that's a hard one because one of the things that a lot of people have done in information security is focus on accuracy at the expense of precision. So what you'll get is people who will call a CISO of a Fortune 100 company will predict next year it's likely we will experience a breach, as opposed to saying sort of and they're going to be right, and they'll call out the fact that they were right, right? As opposed to saying, these are the systems that are most likely to be targeted. Here's the loss we're most likely to experience. Here's the risk that we need to be mitigating against, right? And that's because in information security, I think we have the opposite of the problem we used to have with SOX, which is that there didn't used to be a lot of information running around about how companies were doing on their financial obligations. Now, there's so much tooling in security. The problem isn't lack of data, it's lack of interpreted data that becomes knowledge that we can use to do this kind of risk mitigation. And so I guess the question I've got is, if somebody wanted to figure out what their risk level was versus maybe with sort of a normal level of technical expertise in any leadership role, is it possible to anymore?
I, so I think the accuracy versus precision is really important here. It doesn't require any technical expertise to understand that this dependency is a crucial part of how we deliver value.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, for example, again, just to use my own business, we have a learning management system that we use, a company called Thinkific. They're up in Canada. They serve our needs really well. If they go down, we can't deliver a course. We also depend on Slack. If Slack goes down, none of our customers are going to show up anyway, so it doesn't matter. And Slack will fix it before we notice it's bad because I'm just going to make that assumption.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know anything about this company in Canada. I do, but it don't matter. I don't need to assess that they represent a risk. Quantifying that risk is really hard, but I don't need to do that as an exec. I can say, here's how my business works. These systems are the crucial ones for us to be keeping safe. These are the crown jewels. And I'm going to make the argument that if you, as an executive, don't know that, or your technology is so convoluted that you can't understand it, I'm trying to say this in a polite way, but
Gotta be
maybe it's
polite.
time to
We're blunt
retire to
around
the
here.
golf course.
Yeah, say it.
No, seriously, you have to know how your business runs. And business today uses technology. And I don't think it's acceptable to say, back in my day, we sent the
Hmm.
salespeople out and they had lots of shoe leather on. So I don't care about this Salesforce thing.
Yeah.
Okay, okay, Grandpa. Uh,
It's frustrating to see.
old
I
man
agree.
yells at cloud.
Heels and cloud. That's the frustrating part of this too, is that I think you and I, if you and I were to write down, if we did like we need to do this like Family Feud style, like, go ask 100 infosec professionals, like, what is the most embarrassing ass attack imaginable on your website for your data? I would be willing to bet right now the first person that hits a buzzer is going to be that the answer is going to be the number one most responded answer, and that is going to be a credential stuffing attack. That is just embarrassing, right? Like that's not even leave it. That's not even locking the front door, basically. And so the challenge on this one is if you're the person who's running risk for a company, you're, say, a managed service provider, and you're trying to work with your small businesses. How do you communicate to them? If they have a product, if that small business has a product available online and their customer data is available with a credential stuffing attack, like, how do you communicate that to them in a way that lets them know not just that it's important that they understand it, but that they have a responsibility in this changing environment to defend against it?
So I have some advanced technology I want to share with your audience.
Okay.
Um, and this is complicated, but I think you can make it work, which is get an envelope and sketch on the back of your envelope how the business works. Right? Sit down with your customer and say, what are the crucial things that make your business go? Right? And I'm going to make uh, a little list here. I'm going to find a pen that works and make a little list on the back of my envelope.
Hmm.
So I have, let's see, I think that's working now. I've got my LMS, my learning management system. I've got Slack. I've got Zoom. Um, and if I can, if any of those three are not working for me, I'm not delivering courses and my business is having a really bad day. And from there, we can dig into, okay, there's some other ancillary systems, but if you're an MSP and you don't know what your customers' crown jewels are, you don't know what's really meaningful to them, then how do you distinguish when something is glowing orange in my environment, if
Hmm.
it really matters to me? And someone on LinkedIn is asking, is it unfair of us as
Yeah,
InfoSec pros to expect SMBs to be security savvy? Yes. Yes, it
seriously.
is. As a
Definitely
small
unfair.
business
Yeah.
owner,
Hmm.
I, I happen to be security savvy, but and it actually matters to my business because I teach security. But if I didn't teach security, if I was, I don't know, if I was making wine or I was a veterinarian taking care of your cats, it's sort of unfair to expect me to be a security expert, right? I'm a veterinarian, not a, you know, I'll fix your cat, you fix my computer. It's a deal.
I love that deal. Frankie made an appearance here a minute ago, which is always kind of great. I love that. I love that answer. Yeah, the answer is it's unfair. There's a bunch of stuff that's unfair, but part of reality, right? It's really unfair that I am expected to fully grok and understand every part of current tax law in terms of whether or not I have a responsibility towards it. And the answer is I outsource to professionals, right? Just as an accountant handles your taxes, MSPs handle IT for small businesses. So the responsibility does often lie on MSPs to be interlocutors, and at the same time, it may not be fair, but sitting here and my name's still on the form at the end of the day, right? And I don't know what the equivalent of a credential stuffing attack is over in like accountant land, but now I kind of want to know, because if there's like something that's like the single most embarrassing attack that could happen or the stupidest mistake you could make, I feel like in most of the major fields that relate to my business and keeping it running, it's probably my responsibility to know, honestly. All right, and I'm gonna give Ian the last word on this one before we step over to the last question I'm gonna ask Adam today. I'm a doctor, not a cybersecurity professional. It's the answer, right? Is that we get none of this is fair, but that doesn't mean it's not the reality that we're living in right now. Uh, that's just the last thing.
Ian,
So yeah, go ahead.
I just want to say, Ian, it hurts deeply that you use a Star Trek reference right here.
Adam might be known for his love of Star Wars. So I just do
No,
my
no,
absolute best to
it,
wish him the best every chance I get.
great, great, great use of canon. Well played, well played.
Excellent work.
Anyway, to your question.
So we're gonna give the traditional last question to Adam on this broadcast. Go, I see you over there, Bronwyn. I love that. Just beat you to it. I'm going to give the last question to you, Adam, and that is this question. It's one I've actually never asked you before. It's the last question we ask everybody on the broadcast, which is this: if you weren't an information security professional for a living, if this wasn't the thing that you did, and if you could have been in a different life and done a different job, what is the thing that you would do for a living? Just your different dream profession, the one you dream about retiring into, or the one you sometimes wonder what life would have been like if you'd done that instead.
It's not a question I've spent a lot of time thinking about, but if you look behind me, you can see I've got the Lego. Let's get it in frame here. The Lego
Sure.
Luke Skywalker land speeder back here. I've got myself my Apollo 11 moon lander,
Wow.
and so I'm going to say that if I didn't have a silly fun job in cybersecurity, I would be trying to find a way to eke a living out of Legos.
I love this. All
And
right.
by the
Fair
way,
enough.
if you all have not had a chance to build this set, it's so cool. It's got little openers on the outside. It's got your lamp. Let's turn this around. It's got your ladder for Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin to come down. It's
Yeah.
got your lunar laser reflectometer experiment. It's intensely fun geekiness as a Lego set. Anyway,
I love it. Adam, thank you so very much for being with us today and having this conversation. We dug deep into some pretty serious topics, and at the same time, I feel like it was a great perspective to understand kind of where responsibility and risk lies in a world where we don't often have these conversations, real meaningful conversations with small businesses, with managed service providers. And that is incredibly helpful, as well as massively nerdy. We got some love for the Apollo lander going on out here. All right. Thank you again so very much. This has been a really joy-filled conversation. Any last thoughts you have before we wrap it up for the day and we wish everybody good luck on everything happening this first week of January?
So I'm just going to pick up. Ian is redeeming themselves by getting into Star Wars, and not only, as they say, does the destruction of the Death Star start with a cybersecurity event, but Star Wars, from the very opening crawl through the end of the movie, is in fact the story of a data breach and its consequences. It's the whole plot of the movie. And I don't know how critics get it so wrong to talk about it's Luke's relationship to his father or the hero's journey. Star Wars is fundamentally about information security. And with that, we'll say have a good
Oh
day.
yeah. Have a wonderful day. Live long and prosper, Adam. Bye
Long
for
and
now.
prosper.